The SDK or .NET Business Objects are the foundation to everything we do, and they should be important to everybody, whether you code directly to them or you use them transparently through our applications. So to us, architecture is important, and it matters. This is our technology stack, and at the bottom is the Macola database, Macola schema. On top of that, we have our developer SDK, our Macola API. So years ago, about 11 years ago, when we started the company, we immediately recognized that if we were going to build applications like WMS, that we needed to be able to code through a Macola Business Object library, so we would have real-time updates to the Macola database. And so we've been working on this .NET library for a very long time, and it's gone through many iterations as we've evolved the product from .NET 2 to .NET 4, and it's the foundation. So on top of that, we have the Agility Adaptable Framework. Now, when we originally started building our product, we were building coded applications that used the API. Then about 5 years ago, we decided we wanted to build a rapid application development environment so that we could build out our modules, like our warehouse management, shipping logistics, pallet management, and etc., or even manufacturing systems on top of an open framework architecture that would allow customers, consultants to easily take our existing applications and tailor them to meet any customer's needs, and would not have to have programmers. So our development staff pretty much works on just building basically toolset components and object libraries, and then our consultants, support personnel actually build out our applications on top of that. So what do we plan to cover today? Well, we want to talk about the new 4.1 DLLs that replaced the original 3.0 DLLs. And Bryce is going to talk to you about how to convert a Visual Studio project so that you can convert over these new DLLs. Moving forward, we will continue to install the version 3 DLLs, but any new enhancements and improvements will only be done in the 4.1 DLLs. So if you have something built on the 3.0 DLLs, we did not want to be in a position where you did a build update and then your application would cease to function. How long that will continue to install the v3.0 DLLs will depend a lot on how we get feedback from our customers on conversions. So we're going to talk about how to convert a Visual Studio project, the fundamentals of how to maximize coding efficiency. Bryce, who is the core developer of our objects, will explain the architecture we're employing and how you can take maximum advantage of that architecture. And he's going to show you a new example .NET code project. In the past, we deployed Excel spreadsheets, which was the COM interface component. Almost nobody's coding COM anymore. Everybody's doing .NET. We saw a need to give more robust code examples through a .NET project. And we're going to give you an overview example of how to link multiple object calls into what we call a composite transaction. It's really, to us, the ability to create composite transactions out of our objects that really creates the true power of the system. And then we're going to show you a Design Studio example. The Randy is an example for rapid application development. That's our tool set that sits on top of our .NET DLL objects. So he's going to explain what is Design Studio and Agility Explorer, how to take advantage of applications that you already have, because even though you have the SDK, we actually install with the SDK for everybody Design Studio and the Explorer with a single seat license to the Explorer. So everybody can launch the Explorer, but you have to have a special license then to access Design Studio. And then how to code some applications in Visual Studio. So Bryce is going to show you how to do a composite transaction using the objects, and then Randy's going to show you how to do the same application using Visual Studio and show you how simple it is to do something like that. So let me talk about the SDK and where it's been and where it's going. In the past, we've pretty much focused only on distribution and manufacturing. As we go forward, we've only supported the Macola ES database and the Progression SQL database, and now we support Macola EM10. So if you migrate from Progression to ES to EM10, the way we've built our objects is that they're what I call version agnostic to Macola. So they're totally normalized in terms of the parameters and how you call them, and you just merely point them at the appropriate database and they make the appropriate changes. And it doesn't matter whether you're average cost, standard cost, last cost, bin or lotted, the objects support all those layers and capability. So some of the things that are coming down the road, and IM bill of material, we support most of the inventory tables in different ways for create and updates, but what Bryce refers to is CRUD, or create, update, delete, full support of all properties of all tables and through all of inventory. There are some things we want to clean up there, so that's going to be one of our key focuses this year, is to finish that. In OE, we want to add RMA, probably OE cache. PO has order create, but it's not as versatile as OE, which we've built OE in a way that you could build a full order entry environment. We want to do the same thing for PO this year. And one of the things we've added about 2 years ago was advanced package and shipping. Some of you are aware of that, some of you are using that in the products that we build. But Macola has an inventory, a location, a bin, and a lot layer. Those are what I call inventory layers. So we've added is a packaging layer. So things like stock pallets or stack pallets or totes or whatever you want to call your packaging layer, we can package up inventory and manage that, and a whole new set of object components and database schemas that sit on top of the Macola inventory. And through that, we can package inventory, we can cycle count inventory that's packaged, we can build and ship pallets, stock pallets, so we can buy and make pallets out of manufacturing. We've added shipping, including small package shipping, fully integrated UPS, FedEx, USPS. That's all built into the APS object library. And we have fully integrated EDI to databases that's transparently done through the APS system. And now we're going to expand a little bit beyond distribution. We do today in accounts receivable support both Progression customer create and Macola ES EM10 customer create, but we want to make that much more robust for ES, for the Succinct CNPP and address table, which is the CRM component of Macola ES and Synergy and EM10. So we're going to be investing in making that a very robust set of objects. And we actually have moved into accounts payable. This last build that was just released, we support Macola ES vouchering. And we'll be releasing some applications in Agility Explorer that will be standard components that allow you to take receivers and group them and work from the receiver side back through into the vouchering side and manage that against your invoicing, which we think will be a much more efficient way to finish out the PO process through vouchering. So when we think about our objects, we talk about them in terms of being scalable, concurrent, feature-rich, and reliable. So what does that mean? Well, scalable means they need to be very fast. When we thought about our objects, we thought that they need to be equal to an ERP performance level. And in fact, if you, when people actually install our product and start using our objects or specifically using our WMS, the transaction volume goes up considerably, maybe 4 times, because where you may take a receiver or a few receivers and group them and then enter them in a Macola screen as a group, we will shoot them and manage them at a much more granular level. So we may be doing 4 receivers to 1 or multiple shipments to 1. So the transaction volume goes up. And we have people that are managing transactions at the level of 250,000 order lines per month or 250,000 PO creates and reports a month. And you add to that our entire customer base, and we're talking millions and millions of transactions a month. But we need to be concurrent, which means transaction controls rollback, and we need to support Macola locking. And people do see where a Macola lock can affect our concurrency, and we'll throw up a locking message. Or if you're doing a lot of transactions, you could get a lock in the Macola system. But that's the way Macola is built, and that's how transactions don't collide with each other, and you don't do 2 updates to an inventory quantity on hand where that needs to be updated concurrently and not and additionally. And so it needs to be feature-rich, and we support most of the Macola features. We continue to develop new objects, as I talked about before, but we also get calls for missing features. So we try to be very robust in our feature development, but people continue to, Macola is a very feature-rich product, and people find features in our existing objects, and we put that into our development task list and continue to release those as improvements. And I talked about composite transactions, which we're going to talk about more later and give you an example. And we do still support .NET and VBA-COM. And they need to be reliable. We have over 300 automated tests we run prior to each build release. And pretty much, I can say that even with as many object calls as we have, it's rare that we create bugs in the objects. What I call that is regression. When you have something that works before and then we try to fix something else and then we break what works before, that's called regression. Automated tests try to make sure that we minimize regression. We have very little regression. If we find regression on a build, we'll hot patch it. But a broken object to us is something we take very seriously because it can create a lot of transactional data that can be hard to clean up, and we rarely have to do that. So what's a composite transaction? If you think about, if you understand what POP is, production or processing, if you were to create an order, release a POP order, and produce a POP order in Macola, you would have to do that in multiple screens. And some people do that. They want to report production after the fact. They don't want to create POP orders. They want to just report everything, create the POP, produce the POP, close the POP order all at one time. So if we were to put those together and string those together as one transaction, as our objects are structured to do, and if something fails, roll that back, that now comes one new business process. And so now we've taken an existing set of Macola transactions, we've strung them together, and now we've created a whole new Macola transaction that didn't exist before. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is what we call purpose-built solutions. The reason we have the adaptable framework, the tool sets that allow us to rapidly develop applications, is because we think that every customer needs to have unique applications. If you're attending this conference, whether you're using our applications on top of our framework or you're coding directly to our objects, you already believe in the concept that you need to be able to control the Macola, your Macola business and your Macola processes in your own unique way. And this is something that is really part of our philosophy, is that every customer should be able to make Macola work the way they want to work and not have to work the way Macola is structured. And with that, I'm going to turn the this presentation over to Bryce Lester. And Bryce has been with us for quite a few years. He's responsible for all the object development, and he's also responsible for the Macola or the Agility Mobile or Pocket ES development as well. So with that, I'll turn this presentation over to Bryce. And Bryce, you now have the presentation.
All righty. Okay, yeah, I'm Bryce Lester. As Bruce mentioned, I'm a developer here at WiSys. And what I'm going to demonstrate today is an example of a composite transaction using the SDK, and kind of just go through the flow of that object transaction and just take a look at some basic how-tos. And what we have set up here today is we're going to do a transfer transaction, and we're going to transfer inventory from one location to another, and then we're going to immediately issue that inventory out of the to location. And then finally, we're going to update our inventory tricks records with, we're going to tie those two transactions together by updating our inventory tricks records with a custom SQL statement. Again, so basically having a three-step, three-tier transaction. So I have here a Visual Studio project, and with any Visual Studio project, of course, the first thing we want to look at is our references. And with using the WiSys SDK, you only need to reference the DLLs that you're using directly. Now, these DLLs, of course, will have other dependencies underneath them, but as far as your project goes, you only reference the ones that you need directly. So we'll just hop in here to our reference section, and we'll go to our extensions here, and we'll scroll down to the bottom to find our WiSys assemblies. So this is one way to, of course, you may browse to your DLLs, the WiSys DLLs, which of course are located underneath your WiSys bin directory. But this may not always be common knowledge, but of course you can add a registry entry into your .NET assembly folder to get those WiSys DLLs to show up in your list here, and it's maybe helpful if you're using the SDK on a pretty regular basis. Rather than browse to them, you can get them to show up here. And we actually have on our support site, you can find it underneath the SDK link here, and we'll go through and it'll show you exactly where to add a reference to your WiSys bin folder, and it links back to the MSDN article if you need some more information on that. So again, it's just helpful if you're in and out of, you're using the SDK quite a bit, you may want to just add that registry entry, and again, they'll just show up in your list there. So we have two references in this project. One is the WiSys All System, and the other is our WiSys Inventory Tricks assemblies. So the first is the WiSys All System, and this is really our core SDK DLL. This contains your connection object. This is making the connection to your server, to your database, handling your SQL transactions. It's taking care of your Mac locks entries, as Bruce talked about. It also knows your Macola version, so your things like whether you're on progression or ES, and holds some settings specific to those. So every project that you use the WiSys SDK, you of course are going to have the All System DLL. The other one is the inventory tricks, and in this case, this is going to be used for our issue, our transfer and issue transactions that we're going to do as part of this composite. And just real quick on some of the naming conventions, you'll see here like we have IM and IM tricks, OE tricks, manufacturing tricks. You know, the ones with the TRX suffix on them are typically, you know, those are your transactions. So in this case, you know, your transfer, your issue, your receipt, your quantity adjustments, things like that. And the ones without the suffix, like an IM, you know, these are typically your table-based operations. So if you want to read the item master, inventory location, or do an update or delete, you know, your create, read, updates, and deletes, you'll find those in those assemblies. Okay, so I know a lot of you, like we mentioned, we moved in version 5.62. We recompiled our objects into the .NET 4 framework, and that's the difference between the 4.1 and the 3.0 objects. And I just wanted to quickly show you, you know, once you update, those 4.1 objects will be available to you, and it's really actually a pretty easy process to update your projects from the version 3 to the version 4 objects. And the good news is, of course, is it's backwards compatible. All the method signatures have remained, you know, are intact. So you don't have to worry about backwards compatibility. And of course, the good thing is that the version 4 objects are where you're going to find all of your enhancements, your new features, any updates, patches, and so on are going to come in those 4.1 objects. So to actually update that, all we need to do is just take our version 3 references and swap them out with our version 4 references like that. And that is basically all you need to do to update to the new set of objects. Pretty straightforward there. Okay, so at this point, we're going to talk a little bit about the flow of an SDK transaction. And first and foremost is your connection info object. And I have, this is what we're using to make our connection to our server and database. And in this example, I have just basically a simple UI screen here. You know, for the most part, I'm sure you'll handle this behind the scenes. But in this case, I'm just going to pop up a simple UI. And what we're going to do here, again, the first thing, and again, this is that all system DLL, is the connection info class, and that is what establishes the connection to your server and database. And a good thing to remember about the connection info is you want to basically declare and instantiate that at a high level in your application, and then pass it around to your classes and your forms or wherever you're using it. Just pass it around and then open and close the connection as needed. And the reason for this is that there's a lot of overhead in instantiating this object. So, you know, imagine you're you have some sort of looping process or something like that where you're doing just literally thousands of transactions or something. You would take a major performance hit by instantiating this connection info object over and over again. So best practice, I would say, is to, you know, declare and instantiate it at a high level and then just pass it around from class to class, opening and closing the connection as needed. So let's just actually start to run this application here, and we'll see what, we'll step through some code so you can look at. So in this example here, we're just going to set our server and our database, and that's really all we need to make a connection. And the first method that you would need to call off of that connection info is the parameters method, and this is what you pass your server and database to. Now you will find there are some overloads to this where you have your username and password available, and you don't want to use those. Those are for legacy. Those are there for legacy purposes and have no benefit using those whatsoever. As part of the WiSys product updater, we install a SQL Server user on your SQL Server. So it uses the WiSys SDK uses that WiSys user when it performs transactions. So there's no benefit whatsoever to passing in a username or password. You also have the option to pass an application name as an overload to this. And by default, we set it as Mac MSS which is also what Macola uses. And if I understand it right, that Macola actually has some cleanup routines that are based off of this application name. So by default, we're using it, so it would actually get picked up in those, that cleanup routine would also apply to the WiSys SDK. So in this example here, I'm just, so I set my parameters method, and the next thing I'm going to do is just, I'm just going to do a quick open and close connection just to make sure I got my right server and database credentials. And another good point to make here is the return value coming off of the WiSys SDK methods. The majority of WiSys SDK methods have a return value, are functions, and have a return value of an integer. And they also have this reference parameter, which is a return message. When you make a method call to WiSys, you always want to check that return value. And the reason being is that if anything goes wrong inside of that method call, we're going to kick back a return code to you. So you always want to evaluate that to see if it was successful or not. And we have an enumerated set of return codes here, and you can actually see there's quite a bit in here. You really only need to be concerned with 3 of those. And the first, of course, is successful, which equates to a value of 0. And that basically means, hey, the method processed as expected, and you can go about your business. The other one is failed, which equates to a -1 value here. And what failed means is it can mean quite a bit. It can mean that a business rule was violated. It could mean that you know, there's some sort of connection issue. It could mean there's some data inconsistencies. Basically, anything that any type of error where you would get a -1 means something was out of whack, and you need to stop, evaluate that message, and for the most part, roll back your transaction and restart or retry. And the last one is the record locked by another user. And what this means is that a MacLock record was encountered, and basically you can't go forward because there's somebody else has a record locked in Macola that you are trying to use or modify or so on. And I'll go through an example of that in a little bit here. So yeah, anytime you call a WiSys method, just make sure you're evaluating that return value. And again, if it is a -1 or something other than 0, you'll see the return message show up in your reference parameter there, and you can decide what to do with that. Okay, so what we have is we're going to set our parameters here, and we'll step down through. We're just, like I said, we're just going to test our connection to make sure everything was good. There's our return value of 0, so we know we can move on. Anytime you open a connection, you want to make sure you close it. That's just the general rule of thumb there. Open the connection, close the connection when you're finished. So in this case, we were just authenticating that our connection was good. We're going to close this down, and we'll actually step through here. And at this point, we've determined our connection was good, and we're going to pass that connection info class that we created in our login form, and we're actually going to pass it to our transfer class again, so we're not instantiating connection info classes all over the place. We're just going to pass it around. It's closed at this point. We'll open it when needed. So yeah, we'll step in here. We'll see here we got our connection. We're going to set it locally, and then we're just going to fill up the UI here. And so what we're doing here is we have a bytehorn, and we're going to transfer 12 of those bytehorns from location MA to CA, and then as I mentioned, we're going to immediately issue that inventory out of that location CA. And you can see from this, this is a binned and lotted item, and we're going to transfer it from one bin to another, but we're also going to split that between 2 lots to just make things a little more complicated. Okay, so really we can just, let's just step into this. And all right, so we've initiated our transfer or our composite transaction. And again, the first thing we need to do is we call the connection info open WiSys connection method. And in this case, we're going to start a SQL transaction, which in most cases, when you're doing a transaction, that would be a good thing. So again, we'll check our return value. Everything looks good, and now we'll start our composite here. And so we've initiated, we've instantiated our transfer class now out of the IM tricks. We also have some bin, transfer bin and serial lot collection classes that we're going to use as part of these transaction calls, and I'll go through these couple classes here in a second. Okay, so we've instantiated our transfer class. Now, the first thing you want to do before you start setting properties or anything like that is you want to call the connection method on the class that you're using. I would say almost every class that you will use will have a connection method associated to it, and you are going to want to pass your connection into that. Call that connection method first. And the reason being is there in a handful of situations or handful of the classes out there, there is some setup that occurs that needs to know your Macola version, whether it's progression or EF. And it's just important that before you set any properties or anything, just get in the habit of just calling that connection method immediately before you set any properties or do anything else with the class. So here we're going to pass in our open connection now, and we've set that, and of course we're checking our return values and everything looks good there. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're ready to set some properties, and most of our objects do match up pretty well with Macola as far as what is required and what is not. You know, as you see in the UI, you know, the SDK should match up pretty close with the same requirements that are needed. And we do a lot of defaults as well. So in this example, we have our item, our from location, our to location, and our quantity. These are really what's required by the object. And in this particular, in the transaction class, it's really, you just set all the properties that you need. In other classes, they have method parameters that contain the required requirements. So there'll be some that you just fill out the properties, some that you have all the required parameters. But either way, the SDK will, of course, throw back a -1 value on your return code and let you know that you missed a required value. So let's just step through, and as we mentioned, we're going to transfer a bytehorn from our location MA to our location CA for a quantity of 12, and the username. And for those that are using audit files or creating audit records, this is a kind of a key piece that you may or may not know. We use that username to determine, in conjunction with your Macola control file value, we use that in conjunction to determine if we write the necessary audit records. So if you are doing auditing, you will want to set that username if you're doing audit records. Just if you see a username, set it. The audit records that you're expecting will be then written. Yeah, it's just, as I mentioned, it's just a combination of your control file value and making sure the username is populated on the object property. Okay, so we set those properties, and now we're ready to build our bin and lot collection that we're going to pass into the transfer object. And as I mentioned before, we have these handful of objects here that are available to build these collections. So we have our item bins transfer, and we have our item bin transfer. We have a plural and a singular. And you can think of those, the plural, the item bins transfer, of course, being the entire collection. And the item bin transfer, singular, would be an element of that collection. Think of it as an item in your list of, or a data row to a data table, or something like that. So we have our entire collection and then an element in our collection. We have two classes, an item bins transfer and an item bins. Item bins transfer, obviously, if you're doing a transfer, you want to use this one. Anything else, you want to use your item bins. This would be an issue, a receipt, the confirm ship, production orders, anything like that, you would use this other class. Serial lots are, you use, they're the same for both. So at this point, we're ready to build our collection. And we have our transfer bins collection class, and we're going to call the add method. And of course, we have our bin 100 to bin 200, and then our quantity. And you see that I have an absolute value here. And that is the reason I'm doing that is you can do, for example, negative transactions in Macola, or such as a negative receipt. And while the object or the transaction quantity may be negative, these bin quantities are always expected to be positive. So that's just kind of like a safety catch. So say a negative 12 came through the UI, and we wanted a negative 12, but of course the bin class expects a positive value. Same thing with the serial lots. So it's just a precautionary method to take care of that. Okay, so we're going to add our bins. We've now added our bin to our bins collection. And like Macola, if your item is binned and lotted, there's a hierarchy there, right? So your binned and lotted item, your lot being at a lower level than your bin. So here we handily have a serial lot numbers property or class that we can call right off of the bin. So we have our single bin element now that we've created from our add method here, and now we can associate that lot number with the bin that we're transferring from and to. So we want to take our 117 lot and associate it to that bin collection. And by doing, and again, by having that serial lot numbers class available, we make that direct association right there. So here we have a quantity of 2 that we're going to add. And off of these elements, something that might be helpful to you is there's some series of properties here that are available to you. And a good place where this might come in handy is like if you're doing a receipt for a receipt for a lotted item, for example, and you want to assign the manufacturer's serial number right at the time you receive the lot. You have those properties available to you, and that'll be written back to your lot serial master file. So that's it's just there. In this case, I'm just using the comment field just as an example, but those are available. Again, handy if you're doing receipts and things like that to assign any values, expiration dates, and things like that that you need to manipulate on your own there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add our second lot number now, our 118 lot for a quantity of 10. And we'll just add that, and then at this point we are ready to assign that bin lot collection. All this transfer bins has our bins and lots associated, and assign it to the transfer bins property. And one other side note here is that when you have your quantities, you want to make sure that these quantities balance. So you have a transaction quantity of 12. You got to make sure that your bins and lot quantity add up. So in this case, quantity of 12, we're only using one bin to transfer from, so the entire quantity of 12 is there. And then underneath that, of course, our lot numbers need to add up to that 12 as well. So we have a 10 and 2 here. Otherwise, you'll get a message telling you that the sum of the quantities are out of balance. So that's something to keep in mind when you're just building these collections. If you see that sort of error, just double check that all your quantities are in balance when you're building those collections. Now, say for example, you don't divide up your bins and lots. You're always pulling from the same bin, same lot during a transaction. We have these properties here that are called these flat entry properties that are available on the objects that allow you to, in this case, it would be transfer the entire quantity from one bin to another in one serial lot. And all you would need to do is set these 3 properties. You wouldn't have to go through any of the collection pieces. And that is handy if you know for a fact that all of your quantities will be, you're only going to transfer or issue or receive from a single bin, single lot. You can use these properties as a workaround. And what happens is behind the scenes, it builds all of these pieces and parts, builds the collection. Okay, so at that point, we've assigned our bins, and we're ready to do our post. So if all goes well, we did transfer, and we get our inventory transaction record ID back. So we're going to hold on to that. And now we're ready to do the issue piece of this composite transaction. So we did the transfer, now we're ready to immediately issue that inventory. And so we're going to instantiate the issue class, immediately set the connection, passing in our open SQL transaction. Check that return code. Again, set our properties at this point, our item location, which is our to location now, our quantity, username, and build our bin and lot collection the same way we did. You can see here now we're using the other class to build those bins and lots, not the transfer one, but in this case the other one that is used for issues, receipts, and so on. Same deal here. We're transferring our 117 lot for a quantity of 2 and our 118 lot for a quantity of 10. We've now built that collection, and we're going to assign it to our issue bins property. So we've built the collection, and now we just need to assign it. And finally, we're ready to do our issue. So all looks well. We came back, and now we have our next inventory tricks ID. Okay, so we've now transferred. We did our immediate issue out of that location. Now, as part of this, maybe for some audit purposes or whatever, we want to update those inventory tricks records and associate all the inventory tricks records that were generated with that transaction, those 2 transactions. And we're going to update the extra 8 field in this case and put the issue order number into the extra 8 for all those transactions, basically just tying them together, maybe, like I said, for some audit purposes down the road. And so here we're just going to build our SQL, and we're going to just create a SQL command and set our parameters. And then this is where the SQL processor object comes in handy, is when you're inside, say, a transaction, a composite, or just any transaction that you're doing, you can use the connection info SQL processor to basically read uncommitted data, update uncommitted data, and so on inside of your transaction. So the SQL processor has a bunch of different methods that you can call. For example, return single rows and single values and things like that. A data table and so on, but in this case we're just going to update some inventory transaction records that were updated as part of the other 2 transactions, the issue and the transfer. So we will now, we're just going to call this process SQL method. We're going to pass in our command object that we just built. We're going to tell it we're in a SQL transaction, so it knows to use our existing transaction. We won't have any SQL Server locking record issues at that point, or collisions, and we'll run that, and we have a good return value. And that will be, and so we've basically done that composite where we've transferred, issued, and updated our inventory tricks. So let's just hop over here. I think these are the 2, 6. And right, okay, so we have our 2 transfer records and our issue, and they all now have that order, that issue order number associated to them. So that is the basics of a composite transaction. Again, very useful to build your own custom, your processes, string together a series of transactions, and if you have custom tables that you need to work with, again, the SQL processor comes in. The SQL processor class is very handy. The other thing I wanted to show is dealing with locking and MAC locks. When you're in a high contention database, you're certainly going to run into locks, and this is just one method of doing that. I'm sure there are many others out there, but I'll just give you one quick example of how you can intercept that that lock and maybe just give it some time to complete, before you throw back the error to the application, whether it's running unattended or through a UI. So this is going to be the same process, just we're just going to have some lock handling in place here. So all we're going to do differently here is we're going to institute or put in place a do loop here to just loop through until we get either a successful or a failed, and up to a certain threshold that we can determine ahead of time, or whatever's acceptable to your transaction. So here we have the start of our do loop, and down at the bottom here you can see we're going to try up to 10 times, and then we'll just wait a second between each one. And what we can do here is, let me make sure I don't have any. Okay, so I don't have any Mac locks out here, so we'll just go into Macola and we'll just create one for the same item we're working with here. That's fine. And we'll hop back over to our SQL Server window here, and you'll see that here we've just created here's your Mac lock record in Macola. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hop back to our application here, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to run through, and let me actually disable my breakpoints here. So what we have here, this is the other return message we have. So we have the -2 that I was telling you about. So 0, -1, -2 are the return codes that you're going to be most interested in. So here we have a -2, and what we're going to do here is we're just going to further evaluate that return value to see if it was actually a -2 or locked by another user. In this case, it was. So we're just going to flag this. We're going to flag this so it continues on in our loop, and we will roll back the entire transaction. That is certainly the best practice when you're dealing with this. You don't want to open a connection and then just keep trying without rolling back. Depending on where the lock occurs, you could have data in any non-desirable state at that point. So when you do this, make sure you open the connection, try your transaction, evaluate your value. If it's not successful, whether failed or locked, you want to roll back. You want to roll back that connection. So in this case, we're going to roll it back, and we're going to go to the top here and try again. And I'll just let this run through. I have some debug messages down here where you'll see it just kind of cycles through. And when we get to the 10th iteration here, we're going to stop. We're going to throw a message here, and it's going to tell you here that we're locked by another user. And it gives you a little bit of information from SQL Server, what we had over here, that our session ID and things like that. Any information it can pull out of that, and hopefully, if you're having problems finding out who has it locked, then you can use that to go track it down. So now what I'm going to do here is we're just going to try this again. Again, this is a good if you have the high contention database, and it may open up rather quickly. So you can set your threshold to whatever you want. So in this example, 10 times for 10 with a second in between. So we'll start this again, and we'll just hop over here to Macola and escape out of here, and then we'll see, okay, after our 6th iteration here, it completed. So we didn't actually return an error to the application. We gave it a chance to complete, and without generating a phone call or something like that, you just basically gave it a chance to complete. And here's our new IDs here to let us know that transaction completed. So the last thing I wanted to show is that as of build 564, we started to distribute an example application. And you can find that. So if you're up to date on your current builds, you just want to hop out to your WiSys folder and go to Objects, Examples, and it is a VB.NET project. So under there, you'll find a zip file, and in there, you'll find a solution that was built in 2010. Visual Studio. So you'll be able to open that project, and this is it right here called WiSys Examples, and I'll just show you a little bit about that and just kind of go over some of it. So this goes through a lot of the same things that we just did in this WiSys Basics. You know, we have our connection, how to handle WiSys connections, SQL processor, things that you can do with it, bin and lock collections, handling Mac locks, composite transactions. We have a couple AR examples, bill of material, inventory transactions, and maintenance here. So we have, you know, how to call different methods when dealing with items. Our OE one where you can do some create orders, and of course all the different order transaction types, whether you want to pick, confirm, ship, and so on. We didn't, it is new as of this. We haven't fully filled it out yet, so those will be updated over time, where you'll see other examples in purchase order, production order, shop floor, and so on. So to get around in this, so these screens that you see here are just user controls. So inside of that project, if we come back here, yeah, just under your user control section here, under that example project, just go to user controls and find the screen that you want. I tried to name them pretty verbosely, I guess. So OE order transactions, and then, you know, if you want to learn how to invoice an order, just double click on the button there and then find your invoice order, jump down to it, and then you'll see the classes, the methods that you need to call to make that object call. So hopefully that'll help you out a little bit when you're developing. And I think I'm probably way over time, so I better hand this back to Ann.
No, you're not over time at all, Bryce. Thank you very much. That was great.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very good. I've had people asking for samples of code, and then you turned right into this at the end, so that was awesome. Just to remind people, we have one more speaker. Randy has a short session that he's going to share with you. But what I would like to remind people is that you can put questions into the question box on the GoToMeeting controls, and we'll be taking questions mostly at the end. So if you want to put questions in there, feel free to do that. I'd also quickly like to run a little poll here just to find out how many of you are actually presently owning and using our objects. So if you could quickly answer that poll, it would be helpful. And as soon as that poll's been answered, I will show the results, and then we'll give the phone to Randy in just a second here. So it looks like voting is just about done on this. I'll have another poll at the end for you also, but that's relative to how you enjoyed the webinar. So, okay, I think we're done with the poll. It looks like most everybody that's going to answer has. So let me see if I can. There is the poll results. So 70% of the people on the call are already using this. Okay, that's good to know. We appreciate it. Okay, now what I'd like to do is turn this over to Randy Peabody. Randy is in our technical support department, and Randy takes virtually all the support calls that come in about our objects. So Randy's going to show you an alternative method to all the coding that Bryce just showed you. So Randy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ann. I take all the virtual, my name is Randy Peabody, like Ann said. I take all the virtual calls and virtually take all the calls. The first point I want to make, or reiterate actually, is that the goal of all of our SDK objects and Agility Explorer, our main application, is to allow an enormous amount of latitude and efficiency when designing and or performing Macola processes. The SDK and the objects, when used in Visual Studio or any design environment for that matter, are great because you can pretty much start at an empty palette and design exactly what you want with any project that you want. So you have a lot of latitude using just the objects. But it's a lot of work and a lot of writing and debugging and could be time consuming. What I'm going to show you next.
Would you show us your screen, please? Sorry to interrupt.
Seeing it? What I'm going to show you next. What I'm going to show you next is actually two of our main product, Agility Explorer, and our rapid development product that we offer called Agility Design Studio. And then I'm going to use this nice little tool that we have in Agility Explorer to kind of explain what Agility Explorer is and how it works. I opened these two with my little shortcuts, but the first thing I want to show you is where these are actually at. Bryce showed you these before. When you do a product update or a client update, we automatically create this folder locally on the computer. And in this bin folder, you're going to see the Agility executable here and the Design Studio executable here. This is a licensed product. This is a one-user automatic license for all users. So if you're SDK user only, you can come in and use this tool the same way that I'm using it here. The reason that I have this screen up, though, is to make a couple of definitions and to show you a few things and tell you how Agility is designed. What we just looked at were all the objects, and what I'm doing here is just like it says, I am viewing all Agility components. So everything that makes up all the menu options over on this side over here are going to be found somewhere over in this area over here, and it's going to define what that thing is, what type it is, and what project it's in. 2 points that I'll make in a little bit. The type is going to be a component. Agility Designer, when we get into it, I'll show you that. We use in our rapid development environment 18 different components that we wrap around objects to form the logic that you would use to perform a process. Right now what I'm looking at is 916 different things that we have built into Agility out of the box that have all the functionality that we would want to have as far as looking at different things. Some of these are graphs, some of them are process grids, some of them are dashboards. They're one of 18, like I said, different types of components that we use. If I look for OBJ objects, these are actually the objects within Agility. These are built into Agility. There's 166 objects that are built into Agility. These are the same objects that we just looked at in the SDK that you can make reference to, but these are already built into Agility. So it's what Agility is built around. So when I go and look at these, and we will look at them in a little bit in Designer, what you'll see is I'm making the same reference to the same DLLs that you're making reference to in the application that you're designing in some studio product. I have 166 different objects, and I have 900 and some different components. So it's about 700 and some components wrapped around 166 objects to give us the functionality that we have within Agility. What I'm going to do is just kind of show a couple things. First thing we're going to do is we're going to use this to identify how we kind of use this. And then I'm just going to show you how some out-of-the-box functionality and show you some latitude that we have as far as out-of-the-box functionality with Agility Explorer by just coming in and showing this PO receipt functionality here. If I was to look at that and I want to know where the PO receipt functionality is, there's the PO receipt object right there. And that is the same object that we're using, again, in Visual Studio to pull in as a reference and using that and then passing the parameters to it. However, this is built into our product or brought into our product as a component within our product, and we can call and use that to actually do the same thing. Again, I'll go in and show that in a little bit. But a couple points that I want to make about this screen. The first is, after defining what we have here, 900 and some different components, and 160 some different objects, the first thing I want to point out about all of this and the organization of this is the project. Because everything that we have as far as things that happen over here in Agility, we organize those into projects. And in projects, we have components. So this Agility Searches projects has all of these grids in it. this IM Views project has all of these different components in it, and so forth. What I'm going to kind of do as an example here again, just to show how simply they work, is the PO receipt. I'm doing this right out of the box within Agility. I'm going to come down and I'm going to say that I have 3 different purchase orders that I want to receive. This is pretty high. This is a lot of latitude. I mean, really, for all practical purposes, if I do this in Macola, that's a receipt. You know, I go in and I have to do a receipt on that. I'm going to actually receive 300 of these things, and I'm just going to press the receipt button. Wonderful. And if I go out and look and see what I just did, I just did a receipt on 3 purchase orders just by pointing to them on a grid and hitting a receipt button. That's pretty powerful, actually. That's, but again, like I said, as far as the latitude and what it gives you, as far as what Agility gives you, keep in mind we have 166 different objects. I just showed you one. So Agility, out of the box, contains all of these different things. What I'm going to show you next is how this is used in conjunction with the design environment to kind of show you what we were looking at there, what we just actually did. Again, like I said before, there's a project and there's components in a project. I just did a PO receipt. On the menu here, it's called PO receipt. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at PO receipts. And there is my object, which is in the WiSys object transaction folder. And here's the menu option that I have. It's a grid, a process grid, and it's in the PO views project. The reason I bring that up is when I come into the design environment, the rapid development environment here, what I have to open first is the project that I want to look at. So in this case, first I'm going to show you the object over here. I'm going to open the objects, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at the PO receipt object. And I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to show that, again, like I said, lo and behold, this is the same DLL that you were pointing to, that you're making reference to in the Visual Studio product. If I'm going to refresh the class list, I'm doing a PO transaction receipt, and it's going to do a post-transaction at the very end down here at the bottom. I don't know if I can pull my screen. There we go. All the object properties that are going to show up when we go in and look at this as far as object properties of what I have to pass to that DLL. So that object is the same object that you're using within Studio. Now what I'm going to do is going to open another project which contains the PO view that we did, and I'm going to look at it, and here's the PO receipt. And really, when you look at it and see what it does, it's nothing more than a list of all your POs with a button, some filters, and a button to do a receipt. And if I look at what that receipt is, it's nothing more than that PO transaction. So that's all I'm doing here is taking this and I'm passing these object properties. And if I look at what I'm doing here, I'm sending a doc date, an item number, a username, and using the view for the receive column, location. I'm sending all the pertinent things that I need to send as far as that receipt is concerned to that object, and then our environment with this button click will go out and perform that transaction. But again, the biggest thing I wanted to point out here is how many different things we have as far as objects and again, components within those objects right out of the box. As far as Agility is concerned, all of the we have the inventory, the order processing, warehouse manager, purchase orders, and pick pack. all of these based around the objects, and again, the same objects that we're using in the studio environment, but we're using them more in our rapid development environment. What I'm going to do over here now, and something I'm going to make it's highly suggested. These are, when you come in here and look at these are the projects out of the box, and these are the projects that you will find if you come in here and look for some component that you're looking for that you might want to modify or change. These are the projects that are out of the box. If you're going to make a change, you can copy a component and you can create your own. It's suggested that you create your own and then you copy a component out of one of these projects. Components always have to have a unique name. You'll see that when I'm doing different things here, I have to have them listed in there. So basically what I'm saying is don't modify these out-of-the-box projects, but open one of your own projects and then copy components to that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show a small project that I already created, and this is just going to kind of go exactly to what Bryce just did. What we're going to show here is how quickly you saw all the things that you'd have to type and do if you're going to do a transfer within Visual Studio. And again, if you're wrapping that around a process that you have to design, that's a very, very large latitude ability to have. But what I'm going to show here is how we can do that same transaction extremely fast within our rapid development environment. Again, like I said, if we look at the components, what I did here is I created my own new project. I went to, when I was in there, I said new project. I called it webinar. I was then able to come here and say new component and add the different components that I wanted. Well, I want to do a transfer, and I'm going to do that from a button on a grid. So I created a process grid first. And then and to do that, I mean, as simply as new component process grid, give it a name. I called it transfer. What I did is I made a quick query of some data that's here. I don't have any real filters on my data because I'm just going to pull it up as a list. And then I put a button on here that does a transfer. And adding the button was pretty simple. I'm just clicking the add a button and adding transfer. I'm defining it here as a transaction or report. And then down here under the transaction definition, I'm coming into the detail and I'm adding that same transaction again that we used when we used it in Visual Studio, except here I'm using it in our visual environment and it's been brought into our visual environment as an object. But I'm using this now to do a transfer, and my transfer is going to take the query that I have and it's going to list the location from the view. I'm actually going to be asked to enter the to location. I'm not going to put any comments in there or the customer, doc order number. I'm going to actually put the document date as a moving date with 0 days before today, which will be today. Vendor number, quantity, which is going to be a human input again. The username, which will be me. Item number, job number is going to be not applicable. And then I'm returning the transaction ID that I'm creating here to a variable called, to a return variable that's a number. And you'll see why I'm doing that in a bit. The next thing I'm going to do is the same thing that Bryce did, is I'm going to do an issue transfer. This time I'm just coming up here, I'm saying, when I do these things, I'm coming up here and saying add the transaction. Here's my list of transactions that I'm doing. I did the IM transfer in this case, or the IM transfer here, and I'm doing the IM issue here. When you drop them in, you can also move them up and down here, but I'm doing the transfer first. Then I'm doing that same issue that we were doing before. My return value is coming back. I'm filling in the pertinent fields that I need, and filling in my error value here. So I'm going to do my issue, which is going to take the same quantity. It's going to now move it. It's going to issue it. And then I'm going to do the same thing basically that Bryce is doing here, except I'm using progression, so I'm not going to update an extra 8 field. I'm going to update a filler 4 field. But I'm really, when you look at this query, and that query has been brought into my project as a query. Show you that query right now. If you look at the query is literally identical to what Bryce has in his code. I'm using the same variable names, everything else, which then are exposed to me or required of me when I come in here to do this transfer. When I do the transfer and I click that button, I'm required to fill in these two things. And where I'm getting these here is this is the issue transaction ID. And if you remember, I returned that as a number. So I'm going to take that issue transaction. I'm going to choose that right here. And my transfer transaction ID, that is actually going to be this one right here. And I'm going to save that. And I'm done, really. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this same process that Bryce did. A little different, a little visual, a little more visual. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check that item number, and I'm going to click my transfer button. It's going to ask me what my to location is. I'm going to put it to the one right below it, and I'm going to say I want to transfer 10. I'm going to say OK. And if I refresh this, what you'll see is I just transferred 10 from one area to the other area. And again, the same thing as Bryce did. What I now have is these three transactions here, and they are all literally tied together by this filler 004 field at the very end with this 6004. Now, this was the intent of this was to show basically a composite transaction to a transaction that's happening, and that's really what we have here. If you look at what we have, there's no commit statements. I'm flowing from one transaction to the next transaction to my last update statement. And when it's all done, it either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, everything rolls back. If it does, then this is the result that we get. Again, last points that I really want to make is, again, that agility has over 160, like I said, objects built into it. That's what agility does. I mean, it gives you all these great capabilities of giving yourself these flexible ways of doing things that would take either a lot of time to do with code or a lot of time to do in Macola. You can come into each one of these things, like I just showed with the receipt, and you can actually perform processes, and they happen extremely fast. It's the whole basis of our pick, pack, and the shipping, and all of our inventory management, all of our form management, all of those things. So again, but against what Bruce was saying at the beginning of the meeting with the IM, the OE, the PO, the POP, and the shop floor transaction stuff, you break that down, and if you looked at the titles of those things, you had about 6 to 12 things under each, 6 to 10 things under each. That's 60 objects. We have 166 objects. So it's a very, very powerful product out of the box, Agility Explorer, and with the combination of having Design Studio and rapid development and using the components that we have to, like I said, build the logic around a process, which really amounts to building it around those objects, then you have a very, very powerful tool with the ability to take things that you create over here and allow them to be used within your environment over here. I'll just show you real quick that I can take this transfer object that I just took here and I can copy it over to this. Now it's under customer service, under transfers. If I come over here and relog back in, it will be under customer service and transfers, or reports and transfer. And that grid will be there, and that's what I can use. And it's really that simple to develop it and to put it out on the grid. You can then assign it to users. Last point I want to make is that all of this that we've pretty much discussed today is available on training videos. If you go to our web page here, it's the WiSys home, it's WiSys.com home video gallery. You can actually see and watch a number of our video training videos. You can come in here, and then you can always come down to the bottom, down at the bottom of the page. It'll always take you back to our YouTube channel. So if you want to watch the 75, maybe 100 videos that we have out there, there's a lot of information as to how to use Designer, how to use the development kits, and that type of stuff. Last point I want to make is about the 3.0 and 4.0 DLLs and objects that you're using. As of the 562 update, all of the objects that we have available to us that are in Agility here. So if I look again at objects, these have all been updated to the 4.0 or the 4.0 environment objects. If you've captured your own objects in your own projects and you did that 561 or previous, it's recommended to go in and verify the workings of it, and if nothing else, go in and update it to the new 4.1 applicable DLL. With that, I think I'm going to turn her back over to Ann.
Thanks, Randy. That was great. I do want to encourage people to type questions in. I do have a good question here, and Bruce, I think I'm going to direct this question to you. Goran would like us to speak to the M10 objects that Exact is writing versus the WiSys objects that we've been discussing today. So Bruce, do you want to take that question?
I think one of the biggest differences, I'm sorry, my mic down. One of the big differences at this point in time, Exact has been building objects mostly around table maintenance. They have done, I think, something related to the order object and the PO object. We have always been focused more on the transactional side, which is a much more complex side of Macola, and there's a lot more going on to build transactional objects. So if you're going to be doing transactions, I do not know when they're going to get around to doing those. I do not know what the exposure level is of those objects. I have not tried to directly call them, so I can't tell you how that, I don't think there's any documentation at this point as to even how to instantiate and call them and create a connection. And I also know to this point they have not incorporated MacLock control into any of their objects, which the foundation to concurrency in Macola is the logical lock capability. We've got 11 years experience in building scalable high-end objects. So, I mean, we have a lot of runway ahead of them. If they become available to you, it's up to you whether you want to engage and try to use them. I think the only other thing is that the objects they've built have had very little exercise. Our objects have been on the market for 11 years. We have 300 customers, and whether you're using our objects, coding directly to them, or you're wanting one of our applications, everybody's using our objects, even if they're just running an application. So our objects at this point, are very mature, 11 years, and millions and millions and millions of transactions.
So basically, our people, if people have questions about the Exact objects, they're going to need to speak to Exact, but for the most part, our objects are listed. We know what we have. We can answer questions about those. So I think it's
out there, and they're documented. And
right. Goran has a follow-up question here, Bruce, saying that they use OEIM and POP. If they just update to the 4.1 files, will that work, or is there any issues to be anticipated?
Are they coding directly to them, or?
Yes, they are. Yeah, this is.
I mean, Bryce showed you how to change. I mean, so all you really need to do is take your Visual Studio project, and as Bryce showed you, just flip the references from the 3.0 object to exactly the same named 4.1 object, and all the methods and properties are identical, and that's it in the project. Oh, and then you need to change your Visual Studio project over to a .NET 4 project if it isn't already, and that's it.
Okay. Jerry wants to know if 64-bit is coming soon.
Our objects are let me see, maybe Bryce should talk about that. I'll talk about one thing. We developed our objects to be, I don't know, Bryce, can you help me here in terms of, they're neutral between 32 and, what's the term for that? I think Bryce is muted.
Bryce?
Thank you, Kai. I had problems unmuting myself. Yeah, our objects are developed using any CPU platform.
That's right. So
for the target, yeah. So they're developed with any CPU. The executables themselves remain in 32-bit.
Yeah, we did take our so the way it works is if you build a 32-bit executable and you use our objects, then because they're any CPU, then they will be a full 64-bit project, and the objects will be at full 64-bit. We originally tried to take our Agility products, our Explorer, over to 64-bit, and there's a penalty for going to 64-bit. There's more overhead. They ran slower. Even Microsoft documentation recommends that you do not build a 64-bit application unless there's a reason for being 64-bit. Like case in point, you would need to be able to build a grid that has to contain 1 million records or something like that, and you need to have access to a 64-bit memory space. So in light of that, we went back to 32-bit executables.
Okay, I'm just looking to see. Brian was asking about where are documents to outline and detail the objects in, and I pointed him back to Agility Explorer for the list of the objects that that Randy showed. Let's see, what else?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Brian was asking where is documentation about the objects that we have, and I pointed him back to the list of objects in Agility Explorer.
I would like to say that one thing about that, I mean, yes, if you're using our objects, you can go to that. That Agility Explorer piece that's in the system utilities is a great app. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that, but if you're trying to find something in our system, it's a great way to go find them. And you can filter on component type, as Randy was showing. In terms of our object list, it's even bigger than what Randy was talking about. There's a lot of our objects that are not exposed to Agility. They're at a more maybe what I would call primitive level, but still public for a programmer. So there are some things you can do as a programmer that does not make sense for us to do in Agility. And so the object list is even bigger for development purposes.
And I think that's what Brian is looking for, is more information to define the SDK, the objects better.
In terms of the total capability of the system?
Well, he's asking for SDK definitions. That's what he put in the chat window.
Yeah, okay, so we've been asked before to try to list everything that we do, and we've tried to put some documentation together on that. So if we say we do an order entry object, when we put together an object like order entry, we try to make that product so robust that every capability of order entry is there. And that's why I mentioned before, if we've missed a feature and we get asked to add it to the product, most often we'll go ahead and add that feature if we somehow missed it. So like if this last release of the last build 564, we had some people coding over in Europe that were doing a lot of multi-currency transactions. And we ran into some multi-currency features in PO that weren't working exactly correctly, and we went ahead and fixed those and updated the PO. So if we say we have that transaction, we try to make it as robust as every feature capability as Macola would offer. So it's kind of hard for me to explain what we do have and don't have. Well, what I like to do, if people are going to buy and use our SDK and they have a project in mind, the best thing to do is to talk to us about the project you intend to take on if it's not clear that the objects aren't there.
Bryce is also suggesting that that Brian could use the object browser inside of Visual Studio to see objects and methods and properties. Or you can always give us a call and I can put you in touch with Bryce. So I also do want to run this last poll about whether the webinar has been helpful to folks. So I'm going to launch that poll right now, but we've still got another minute or two if you want to put in a couple more questions. Now Brian's asking about method signatures, and now I'm not even sure what he's talking about, Bruce or Bryce.
That's Bryce.
Sorry, I didn't. What was the question about method signatures?
This is Brian asking about objects, methods, properties, and method signatures for the objects.
Yeah, our online documentation is not a complete set of documentation for our objects by any means. Currently, you know, probably the easiest way to see what is available to you is to just open up Visual Studio and just you know, pick your module. You know, if you're trying to work with OE, you're going to want to point to the OE object, and then just sort by your public methods. And then inside of Visual Studio, of course, in the object browser, you can see those public methods, the parameters that are required for the method, and then the object properties that are associated with the particular class. So yeah, as of right now, that is really probably the easiest way to see the complete list of what is available to you with the SDK.
And Glenn says that the object browser in Visual Studio will show you all the methods and the properties. A couple people have asked if they can get the project that you showed today, Bryce, and I'm sure we can get that. That's not on the web currently, is it?
No, that particular, the last project, the example project, comes down in your 564 build, but the SDK, the sample project I spent most of the time on is not on the website yet, but yes, we can certainly distribute that.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I don't think we have any other comments or questions here. Bruce, do you have anything else before we close? I think we're just about done.
I'm trying to think of anything that came to mind that we might have. Well, I don't think so. I think we covered it. I guess I just want to make, I think Randy made it pretty clear that since 562, if you have a project that was written calling any of the objects that we publish, like the inventory transaction or a receipt or whatever, and you call that in a Design Studio project of your own, and again, you used our published distributed objects, because the objects are pointed to by an identifier, then you don't really directly reference the objects in Agility, you just point to them. And now that we've updated the objects in that pointer, then all your projects will automatically be updated to the 4.1 objects, and you don't have to do anything if you've done that in development and Design Studio on your own. If you have recaptured those objects, as I said before, which is really important on your own, not that the 3.0 objects won't continue to work, but you do want to start thinking about re-referencing your captured objects over to 4.1. And anybody that's done a project today in Visual Studio and cut it on your own, again, there's no sunset right now on the 3.0 objects, but we're going to be doing all feature and bug fixes in the 4.1. So it's just to your benefit and time to get over and move your project. Again, if you've updated since 562 build, you have the 4.1.
And we have one final question from Thomas. He wants to know if it's possible to unconfirm ship a single serial or lot, or can you only, or is the only option to unconfirm the entire sales order line? Do we have a quick answer for him?
I guess if you confirm shipped 5 on one lot and 5 on another lot, and you want to just unconfirm, let me think about that. No, that's not true. You would have to unconfirm ship everything before you could, and then you'd have to reconfirm ship.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Bryce. Thanks very much, Randy. Appreciate everybody that was here and the good questions that we got from everyone. We will be publishing the webinar here. We did make a recording of it, so we will be publishing it, and we'll be getting the code that Bryce used, the example that he used, out on the web too. So appreciate all your attendance. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.